Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we're going to talk a little bit about ChatGPT or Google Bard or Copilot, mobbing with generative AI. So, Austin, I think you've been doing a little bit of this lately. So, can you tell us about your experience, and then maybe we can just dive into some philosophy discussion afterward.
Sounds great. Sounds great. And maybe we'll break this up into a couple episodes at least. So I think my first experience was with mobbing with ChatGPT specifically, and so the way it came was it's been a buzz on social media and the internet for a while, and I've kind of noticed it. I've noticed people posting jokes like, oh, they asked ChatGPT to generate a song about TDD or something like that, and then they'll post that on social media. And then what was interesting is the current mob I'm on, we're doing a greenfield new mobile application. And someone on our mob was experimenting with ChatGPT over the weekend for code generation. And I started getting text messages on Saturday or Sunday. I was like, I think ChatGPT can write our app. You know what I mean? Like, we're working on. And so I was just like, okay, let's run the experiment. And so we got it up and running, like ChatGPT. And the way we started to talk about it was like, oh, we just added a fourth person to the mob, to our mob of 3. We added ChatGPT. And what we did, so to speak, while mob programming is, we're like, okay, what happens if we let ChatGPT navigate for a long stretch of time? Like, just whatever it says, let's try. And what we realized pretty quick was that, and I think you warned us about this, Chris. You joined our mob for a little bit to talk to us about what we were doing, but is that its knowledge was a little outdated for the framework we're working on. And it was really good at solving one problem at a time. So if we gave it like, hey, make us, a mobile app in this framework to satisfy this feature, it was pretty good. But if we gave it, hey, can you make a mobile app that satisfies these 4 things? It started to step on itself and give us code that wouldn't compile, or it would, it's like, oh, new up this class and then pass in this parameter. And there's no such parameter, Yeah. And so what we learned, there's a lot of thoughts and a lot of different tangents we can go, but where I'm currently at is it's a phenomenal help to the mob as another person, quote unquote, so to speak, for asking it, some questions at a time. Like, hey, our code is complaining about this linting error. How do we fix it? Or how do we do this in this framework? And it'll be really good at taking your current context and adding one thing to it. But if you give it too much at once, it starts to lose its mind a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. What's been your experience, Chris?
Well, so I was actually just talking to David Bernstein a little bit, and he was talking about writing his book on ChatGPT prompts. And he was saying that he was basically using an interrogation method. So basically it's, when it gives you the incorrect answer, then you keep correcting it in the same stream of chats.
Yeah.
And until you get to something. So I thought that was an interesting idea. And I think we kind of went back and forth a little bit, and it kind of suggested this idea of Socratic questioning for ChatGPT. So that was one thing for those bigger items. It's like, oh, hey, that didn't work, but could you make this part of it work now or something. I also so maybe there's some key terms that I think are important for people. One is ChatGPT is trained off of a certain data set. Like you said, it's old knowledge. So specifically right now, the console says for me that it was off of 2021, or data after 2021 is more sparse. And then I think another thing is one other thing that I warned the team of, I think early on, was hallucinations are a really big problem. And a hallucination for generative AI is for the AI to state something as fact, even though it doesn't know if it's true or not, right? And so, it will, if it doesn't know today's API, or if the API doesn't exist, it will hallucinate what that API will look like and give that to you. Um, it'll just pretend like it knows, because it's going to respond to you as if it knows. And AI sometimes has confidence intervals and other things, but I think in general, ChatGPT, you'll get a lot of these hallucinations today, and they'll get better over time because these models get better and better as you go. So I found that pretty interesting. One thing, I do video game programming as a hobby, and one thing I did try doing was writing unit tests and then having it write the code that will make the unit test pass. And that was working fairly well. I would get, but often I would get something that didn't work, or I would get really bad code, and so that slowly led me to formulate the idea that it's like ChatGPT right now, as it is today, is like having a junior developer that is really overly confident. And so it's like, oh yeah, it's like your first day out of college, go write our app for us. And they go off and like, yeah, I'll do it. And then they like just write a whole bunch of stuff and then like maybe not try it ever or something. And so the way I've been describing it to people lately is like ChatGPT is a junior developer that is just good enough to take up all of your time with correcting problems that he produces. And so that has been a little bit of a journey in my thinking, but it's a whole lot better than when Copilot first launched, or like they had like the invite only beta of Copilot, and everybody's like, wow, this is really awful. And I know Copilot has also gotten better with the new models, but
Yeah.
I think one thing is like there's a progression there, right? So like with when I'm ready to abandon something, it's when you like stop seeing improvement or you start seeing regressions, right? And that's when I'm like, oh, but right now you're seeing like leaps of acceptance, and so it's on its, if it hasn't crossed the chasm already, the diffusion of innovation, it is on its way to crossing the chasm, right?
Yeah.
And so then GPT-5 will be another iteration, but I think, because of the way that generative models work, there'll be research in new generative models, obviously, but the way that they are right now, it is very much like here's the entire context, and to the extent that you can process my entire context and give me an answer, then you can work with that. And so I think that the depth of the context is still a major limiting factor. So I don't know. Those are a little bit of my ideas on that.
Yeah, and I think I would agree with your criticism of it when the problem's bigger than a bread box.
Yeah.
But if it's a fairly moderate problem, it's almost like having a fourth mobber. If you go back to our scenario that sees different things than we do, and I think if it's a moderate sized problem and not too big, its insights are something that the three of us didn't see, and so, for example, we were looking at a chunk of code for a while, and the compiler was complaining, but the compiler error wasn't great. And so we just fed it that chunk of code, and we're like, this is the error we're getting. What is it? And it like spotted it immediately. And it was just like something really moderately off. And there are other times where its insight was quite amazing, like what it found, and then when it's a moderate sized problem, we notice that the correcting helps. So it says like it gives us the thing, and then we give it back the error, and like it's like, oh, we tried what you said and it didn't work, and here's the error it gave. It's pretty good at correcting itself. When it's the big problem that it can't solve, the confidence, the hallucinations, this is hilarious. It still responds back. We love the response, certainly, with an exclamation point, and then gives you like the next chunk of code. And when it's handling a problem too big for itself, it'll still, like you said, just be so confident but so wrong, you know.
It's the most confident in the world junior developer with access to all of Stack Overflow, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah,
I Googled this and this is what it is. So,
yeah.
like, well, yeah, but architecturally speaking, that's not the best idea. Um, and
Yeah,
so, yeah, you might get into a cycle of correcting constantly, and that could take up a lot of time.
yeah,
It
exactly.
certainly, like, for sure, it solves the clean slate, like the blank slate problem. Like, if you're staring at code and you're like, what should we do next to move this incrementally forward? Um, just telling it like write a unit test to do this has been super cool. And
Yeah.
I'll even like, so in my game project, I've been able to give it my test setup and just say, write a test that will prove this. It'll write the test, and then it's like, okay, either I could have it try and write me an algorithm, or I can write an algorithm just to make the test succeed. So, definitely like a blank slate, and then going forward, it helps tremendously. Just like with, writing an essay or writing other things,
Mhm.
just in general. Uh,
Yeah.
Also, like writing elaborate documentation that people might be, so you could say document this function.
Yeah.
And it'll, so if people are stuck in, I know that we try not to do a lot of whole commenting and things like that, but if you're stuck in an environment where you have to do tons of commenting, like one thing is you might write the algorithm first and then just have it document it. But that brings me to leakage. So another big concern in generative AI is if you copy your production code into that AI, it may become training data. And there are claims right now out there of like, oh, models like ChatGPT and others that get updated more often are leaking prompts out to other, people. And whether that's true or not, I think is yet to be proven. But the assertion, I think, by the companies themselves is, oh, well, we don't train with that data necessarily, but then people are seeing like exact copies of their code come back out when prompted the right way.
Mm.
And then I think, so leakage is this idea of like, if you copied your proprietary algorithm into ChatGPT, does it then get leaked out to somebody else trying to do the same thing when they ask for that question?
Okay.
And
Gotcha.
so that can be very dangerous, especially for a company. But that also brings me to intellectual property law. So the other main concern, I think, to think about is for generative AI images. So you give it text and it gives you an image back. The courts have ruled that no one can copyright that image once it's done.
Mm.
And so, and then there's also this idea that the maker of the model can be sued by using copyrighted material in the training data. And so there's twofold problems. You might accidentally copy a copyrighted or proprietary piece of code, and if you do, just because it came from the model did not mean that it didn't originate from its training data, which was actually copyrighted somewhere. So you could have like a violation for the company on a legal standpoint. But you could leak your code. Or another thought experiment that I was thinking about when discussing this earlier was, what if ChatGPT had ingested as training data a GNU license open source project. So like in the GNU license, or correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a license out there that is very aggressive. So if you use this code in any of your code also gets covered by this license, meaning that all your code
Mm.
becomes open source automatically.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so if it copied an open source piece of code that was under that license, does that make your proprietary system now enforceably open source? And so I think all of these questions are going to be really hard to answer coming up. So like suggestions that I have for people is, don't use the generated code as stated in your own, like don't copy pasta
Yeah.
generated code. And when you're doing these things, like it's like almost like understand and rewrite. It doesn't really deal with the clean room problem of never being aware of an answer that had been copyrighted, but
Yeah.
it does, give you at least a layer of abstraction away from it. And then also never ever copy your production code into ChatGPT, because then it probably will become training data, because the licensing is such that, especially if you're using the free version, if you're not paying for a product, you are the product. And so if you're using the free version, then the things that you copy and paste in are probably becoming training data for the next model.
Gotcha. Yeah. So you got to be careful what you put in there if there's anything significant. And I like what you said about the mob. I almost see it as like the mob is a check on it, just like any other person in the mob in a respect, where you just don't take what they say and, like you said, copy pasta. And I think almost everything we've done that's bigger than half a line of code is significantly modified from what it suggested, but it will still generate an insight that's very helpful. It kind of pushes us forward to the next step. And there's a couple points I want to hit. One was tests. We've used it for tests before. So we say, like, can you generate a test? It does a pretty good job. It also does a pretty good job at, hey, can you implement to make this test pass, which is pretty fun. What we noticed is it's almost like Google. So I guess this whole time with mob programming, Google's been like the hidden fourth member of the mob if anybody starts taking on the researcher role. Yeah. And the big difference I've found with using any search engine like Bing or Google or Alta Vista, if you're still out there, if people are still using it, or Ask Jeeves, is that what ChatGPT does is it gives you a very concise, specific answer with an explanation, right? And so where what we notice sometimes is when we are Googling for a solution, we might get 50 results, and it's hard to know if it fits our context. Where with ChatGPT, you can give it more and more context of, like, okay, like I think we put in like a Google type search into it for, like, hey, how do we do secure file storage or something like that, right? And it gave us like 5 options. Like, we asked for some options. We're like, well, what option is better if here's our requirements? And then it narrowed it down. Then we're like, okay, that sounds good. Can you give us a code example? And then it gave us a code example, right? Where with Google, that's a little bit a different process, right? And so it feels very simple. I guess there's less to, like, when I look at Google results, I'm like looking at 50 things and my eyes are trying to find the one thing that's important, right? Yeah.
So it's really funny that you mentioned that, because in the early days of mobbing, one of my co-mobbers was basically getting really mad at me because, like, my method of doing Google research is I type in my question, find the first Stack Overflow, skip to the answer, and read what the answer was.
Me too.
And it was incredibly frustrating to them that I wouldn't read the question. Like, it really, really bothered them, like to the point where I had some very stern feedback given to me. And so it's funny because it eliminates that whole, like, process of skipping towards the answers and then working your way back if you're still interested, and so on and so forth, because there's like a priority of data, and it's often, like, find the title. If the title looks good at all, go to the bottom of the page, you go find the thing, go back to the top and look at it again. And that whole process, like, quote unquote, gets automated away. And just as, like, kind of a meta comment about the emergency mode that Google has gone into, is like ChatGPT is stealing away search traffic, and Google makes money off of ads because of their search. And, like, this is a fundamental threat to Google's core business model, right? And so it's really interesting because, like, the landscape of tech can be changed considerably right now if Google cannot catch up. And using Google Bard a little bit has been interesting. We'll see how that plays out, but it certainly still feels very early in comparison. But they did have something up and running fairly quickly after realizing that this was a problem. So but again, like, generative AI as co-mobber, I think, is probably here to stay, and will grow. I think that we will just be able to solve a lot more problems faster and define the new problems more quickly. And so I expect over time that cycle time will be brought down by these systems, and gradually just grow better and better over time. But also, I think that there's hardware limitations. I think the computer hardware, and especially NVIDIA is probably in a good good position right now because everybody is going to be wanting graphics cards and things like that at the moment.
Yep. Nice.
Yeah.
Very good. Very good. And I think 2 more notes. I'm withholding all my comments on Copilot because I think that'll make a good next episode. But because we started, what was funny is we someone in our mob went on vacation and then they came back and we're like, hi, we've added 2 more robots to our mob.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, wow. Yeah. But
I was talking to a friend, and his wife went on vacation, and while she was on vacation, he bought a robot vacuum and a robot mop and a bunch of other stuff. And when she came back, he's like, "Oh, I have a bunch of robots doing all that stuff." so it was kind of reminded me a little bit of that. But
oh, that's funny. Yeah. So I have one serious set of notes and then a couple lighter notes, and then I think that's the end of my thoughts on ChatGPT. But on the serious side, an interesting experiment was. We've been working on some unit tests, and I've been kind of having a suggestion for a while, and the mob wasn't really into it, and that's fine. That's good. But what we did was someone had the idea. They told ChatGPT, you're an extreme programmer, and what would you do with this code?
Awesome.
And what was fascinating is the suggestions that came back were really good. It was like, it gave 5 suggestions and I was just like, wow, what great ideas, and like, I think the third one was like what I've been saying for a while. And it had some great refactorings in there and it gave us a good checklist of things to do to improve the code. So I thought that was pretty cool that you could like give it a new identity and then ask it to look at the code that way. And then on the lighter side, we've been using it to generate Git commit messages. I think you might have planted the seed, Chris. And so some of our Git commit messages are, okay, you are Batman. How would you do this Git commit message? And it's like, extracted the duplicate spinner verification code and brought it to justice. The code can breathe easier, free from the grip of redundancy. Gotham is safe once more. And so it's it's been a lot of. That's been pretty fun. And nice. There was another group that we were looking for help from, and they weren't responding. And so we gave it like a humongous chunk of very cryptic error code. And we said, can you make a song about this in the style of a band of the person we were trying to reach? And that we knew they would recognize. And then they laughed and then they responded to our question. And it was like, nice. So using the lighter side of it, it's pretty good at jokes. But as it warns, it can get offensive. So but it tries to stay away from that. But so now when I come downstairs from working remotely, sometimes the kids will ask, so what did the robot say today, Dad? And so that's I'll give them some examples. But I don't know. Anything else on ChatGPT before we close this one out?
Yeah, no. One other recommendation that whole kind of segue reminded me of was I had sent a message to the department and they're like, "Oh, this doesn't sound like you." So then I was like, and it was from ChatGPT. I was like, "Oh, that's obvious." So I just said, "Okay, go ahead and add 5% spelling mistakes to what it did," and I reposted it, and they're like, "Oh, that's good." So I think modifying things that way has it was surprisingly effective at understanding what 5% spelling errors look like.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's fun. I'm a futurist, as it were, and I have a deep interest in machine learning in general anyway. But this is exciting times. I've also heard a lot of people come back and be worried about what this means. And I think it's the same thing as every tool. It can be a tool. It can be a weapon. Tools make people more effective and faster at what they do, and therefore, like the work landscape changes because of that. And so you shouldn't fear the new technology. You should seek to understand it and get involved in what it means to use that technology well. So there might be extreme programming, there might be extreme generative AI prompting in the near future as well. So
yeah, and it did you asked it to make a mob mentality episode, right?
Yep.
Script, and it took something that I said recently and put that into the script that I said online somewhere in one of our videos. And then I shared that with my wife, and she was kind of blown away. She's like, "Oh, that's a little scary."
Yeah. Well, also it pulled the full names of former guests out of the transcripts and then used them. And some of those happened to be our coworkers as well. So like it was very shocking. Like, oh, it pulled like this really relevant concrete data out of its memory store somewhere.
Yeah.
And so so the weights and it's pretty interesting. So there's no public access to any of this to the ChatGPT stuff, because that's all closed, but Llama is an open source model, and it's kind of the same thing. And if you look at the Stable Diffusion model, it's 4 gigs, so that's for creating AI generated images. And then Llama is 31 gigs just for the model. So those are all like neural network weights. And that's kind of mind blowing to me. So anyway, I love it. This is all super interesting and will change. I'm a big chaos fan, if no one's noticed that already. So
Nice. Well, we'll pick up part 2 of this sometime soon. And to everyone, what's been your experience? I've seen a few posts online about people. I think there was one group at a pub having it ChatGPT generate production code from their tests or something. And so, please share your experiences. LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and more. And we'd love to hear what you think about this. What are your thoughts? Is it a member of your mob? And how's it helped? Or is it not because of certain experiences you had? And we'd love to hear it. Please like and subscribe and share, and we'll see y'all next time. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye, everybody.